Hi, I'm Adam Porter and this is my board game channel, Adam in Wales, and if you've been following me for a while, you're probably expecting some sort of top 100 at the start of the year. I hesitate to call this an annual event because that kind of commits me to doing the same next year, and it's a huge undertaking. But we're doing it, and this year we're looking at my top 100 all killer, all filler games. Okay, so filler games is the term that the board gaming community gives to games which can be squeezed in between bigger games. So they tend to be games with a fairly short duration, fairly simple rules, and I've added in a criteria here about being a little bit portable. I tend to think of filler games as coming in small boxes. And so that means that I have excluded some games which other people might consider fillers. I've excluded some of the really prominent party games, things like Codenames and Just One, or The Resistance, games which I wouldn't really think of as a filler. I wouldn't squeeze them in between other games. They may be the main event, right? And I might play them over and over and over again. So although a single game is a short duration, actually we end up playing that game all evening long. So some of those games have been left out. I've also left out big box fillers, by which often I mean dexterity games really. It's games that are very simple and do play in a short time frame, but they're pretty massive. So games like Bandu, or Junk Art, or Dr. Eureka, or Ice Cool, these are great filler games, but they're too big. I'm looking for portable experiences in this top 100, and the aim here is to show you games which often wouldn't feature on top 100 board game lists because they tend to get overlooked in favour of the massive strategic games, the Euro games, the big Ameritrash games that tend to feature on a lot of people's top 100s. So we're focusing here on the little games, perhaps the underdogs, and hopefully bring some new titles into on your radar which you haven't come across before. So number 100 on the list is Kimono from Zoch Verlag. So this is an I Split You Choose game where we lay out a series of cards, all with different points values, and you're going to try and gather up sets of these cards. But each card has a different number of ribbons on the top of it, and that indicates the maximum number that you can have of that type of card before you start to take penalty points. And the way the game works is that the initial display of cards is straight away split into two separate selections, two separate groups of cards. The players then place face-down bids for which of those selections they'd like to take. And if you're the only person to select one of those selections, great, you get to take all of the cards. But if multiple people have selected it, then you're going to have to split that selection again and place a further bid. And so the selections keep getting split and getting smaller and smaller until eventually everybody has taken a selection of cards. It's a really neat mechanism. There's not too many of these I Split You Choose games out there, and they're always really fun. This one's a little bit more complex than most. There's a few more, extra little exceptions and special rules and special cards, which can make it a little bit more tricky to learn. So that's Kimono from Zoch Verlag. And number 99 is Absacker from Leo Colovini and Amigo, and I think this has had probably multiple different editions. Now an Absacker in German is like the final drink of an evening, the very last thing you consume when you're already blind drunk, I think, at this point. And that's pretty much what Absacker's like as well, a mindless little card game with nothing to it. So essentially you're playing cards into different columns, so you'll have a hand of 3 cards, and if you're playing a number 4, you've got to put it on the column with the other number 4s, for example. On your turn, you can play 3 cards. You can put them in one column, so you could put a group of 4s together into the 4 column, or you can split your cards across multiple columns, maybe add to the 4, the 5, and the 6 column, for example. When you play the 4th 4 into a column, then you get to take all of those cards from that column, or the 5th 5, or the 6th 6, and so on. And at the end of the game, the player who has the most cards wins. That's it, okay? It is mindless. But there's something about how slick and intuitive that mechanism is that I want to place cards out there. I've got to clear out my hand and draw new cards into my hand. But I don't want to be putting down maybe the 4th 5, because that opens up the possibility for the next player to put down the 5th 5 and then claim all those cards. So there's constant timing side to it. It is very, very slight, but it's good for playing with children. And I think as a core mechanism, I could see this blowing up into more interesting games. This is more a mechanism than a game, but it's one that I particularly admire. So the next game on the list is Ohanami from NSV, and this is a pick and pass drafting game, a bit like, Sushi Go or something like that, where you pick, in this case you pick 2 cards, then you pass the rest of your hand along, you take another 2 cards, pass the rest of your hand along, and with those 2 cards that you're picking, you can either discard them or you can add them to your display. And you can have a number of columns, I think it's 3 columns that you can have, and each time you play a card onto it, it must be the highest card in that column or the lowest card in that column. And so if you take a big jump, if you go from a card in the 20s and now you're placing a card in the 50s, for example, that means that in that column you're not going to replace anything else in the 20s, 30s or 50, and you're going to always have to play something higher or something lower. So again, there's a timing element to when you take these cards, and then at the end of the first round, one of the colours scores. At the end of the second round, the scores change and a different colour scores more, and then the third round, a different colour again scores more, and then there's some cards that only score at the end of the game. So it's all about when do we take these cards. Very simple mechanisms, but it's a fun twist on the pick and pass gameplay of something like Sushi Go. And at number 97 is Magic Rabbit, which is from Lumberjack's Studio. And Magic Rabbit is a cooperative, limited communication speed game where you've got a small sand timer. You don't have very long. I can't remember whether it's 2 minutes or 3 minutes or 1 minute. I don't know. But you've got to reposition tiles to get them into order. So you're trying to get the rabbits from order from 1 to 9 and the hats in order from 1 to 9. But there's only certain actions you can do. So you could, for example, swap 2 hats, or you could swap 2 piles, or you could peek underneath one of the piles to see which type of rabbit is underneath it, but you can't communicate that to the other player. And the great thing with Magic Rabbit is that the rules keep on getting more complex. Once you've achieved it, you've beaten it as a little team, then you can open an envelope and it will give you new sort of limitations on how you can move the various different elements around and what your options are on your turn to make it more difficult. So there's many different difficulty levels that you can work through those achievements. It's a really fun, frantic exercise, and a bit like something like the Mind. You're getting in sync with the other player, and then you're starting to feel that sense of achievement as collectively you work out how to complete this puzzle. Number 96 is a memory game from Amigo, and this one's called Deja Vu. It may be my favourite memory game. I'm not sure. Magic Rabbit is also a memory game, a really good one. Deja Vu is a game where there's a bunch of different tiles laid out on the table representing all sorts of different objects. A lot of them look fairly similar. And then you turn over cards one by one, and when a card when an object is on a card for the second time, you have to then grab that tile from the center of the table. But of course, if you get it wrong, then you're going to be, you're going to be punished later in the round when it turns out that you'd got it wrong and actually that thing hadn't been featured twice. But it's very easy to get confused because, as I say, the different tiles look similar to each other, and also because in the next round that you play, the same things are going to be coming up again. So you're going to be thinking, well, I have seen that one before, but was that this round or was that the previous round? So it's just a really nice twist on memory games with a nice speed element to it, nice production. I've always found this one really fun. Number 95 is a really unusual trick-taking game called Trickster from Daniel Solis, and this is a game where the second player gets to make most of the really impactful decisions. So the first player might play a card, the second player then, if they play a card which matches colour to the first one, every player is going to have to match colour. If they play a card which matches the character from the first card, then every player must play a matching character. Or if they play a card that doesn't match the colour or the character, then every player must play a card that doesn't match the character or the colour. And so that second player is really influential in every round. And each of these cards has a different special ability on it. And the cards that you use in one game are different to it. There's multiple different cards in the box, and you only use a selection of them in any particular game. So you can make the experience different based on the powers that you pick. It's a really clever, fairly chaotic trick-taking game that looks great, and it's just got some really interesting ideas in it. So I've really enjoyed Trickster. Number 94 is Omerta from Helvetique. Now Omerta is a variant on Golf, the traditional card game which you can play with a standard deck of playing cards. So you've got a series of cards laid out in front of you, face down. You can peek at a couple of them before you start, and then the game is largely taking a card either from the top of the discard pile or from the top of the deck and then swapping it with one of your face down cards and trying to get to a position where you've got a really low score in front of you. And here we're trying to get to, I think it's 7. You want to be below a score of 7, at which point you can call Omerta and then we all check and we see if you have indeed got the lowest score, and there's various different scoring criteria for what happens if you have or if you haven't. But as you would expect, there are various different special abilities on some of the cards that allow you to swap cards around in front of the different players and steal cards and get access to new cards, all this sort of stuff. And there's also this little speed element, which is if you discard a card onto the discard pile, if anyone else has that card in front of them, and you may not know this because it's face down, they can then grab that card and play it on top, and the first person to do it gets to get rid of one of their cards, thus reducing their score. It's a really nice twist on it. There's lots of games of this style, things like Rat-a-tat-cat and Silver and Cabo, so this is not anything revolutionary, but it's a nice package, and with Helvetique, these games always look great. And it plays really, really well. So I'm really fond of this one, Omerta. Number 93 is Bez's Wee Whimsical Creatures, and there's a full name is a game about wee whimsical creatures and making noises until somebody guesses them, or something like that. It's got this long title, but essentially what we're doing is laying out a series of these creatures, and then a player will make a noise, any noise they like, and then the other players have to try and guess which of the creatures was making that noise. It sounds simple, doesn't it? It sounds a bit silly, and it is really simple and really silly, but it's really funny as well. And I know this one's been picked up by a French publisher and released with the name Creatures, and it may be with some other publishers in different territories, I'm not sure. But it's a really nice little party game, again a great one to play with kids, but fun for a group of adults as well. So that's Wee Whimsical Creatures and blah 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 blah. Next up at number 92 is Dice Stars, which is a roll and write game from Bruno Catala and Matago. At least my edition was. I believe it's come out with WizKids as well, I think. This is a roll and write which is perhaps a little bit more complex than things like Quicks and Quinto, but less so than maybe Ganchon Clever. It's themeless, essentially. You're just rolling dice and then you're selecting a group of dice which you can then enter into either a column or a row. And basically you either select all the dice of one number or all the dice of one colour, or you select all the dice showing stars. And then you're going to enter those numbers into various different columns, and some columns will multiply the scores of other columns. You've heard all of this before. This is just another one of those games, and it's a nice one, it's a fun one with a good little solo mode, so I'd recommend it. Dice Stars. Number 91 is a game which is only available in German, and I have actually myself done a Google Translate German to English translation. It's up on the Board Game Geek site, so if you do get a copy, you should be able to work out how to play it, although there is a tiny bit of text on the cards, easily memorised what that text means. And the artwork and everything is so good that you'll be ignoring the text anyway, okay? This is a really cute Western-themed game of blackjack, essentially. And you'll know that I like blackjack because my game Compromat is based around blackjack. And in fact, I picked up the game Black Jacky when I was making Compromat and kind of researching what have other people done with the blackjack formula. Now, Black Jacky is very different to Compromat. It's much more of a take-that, sort of family-friendly game. And you're all playing sort of, you're taking turns, you're drawing a card, you might be swapping cards with the discard pile, you're trying to get as close to that 21 as possible before you sort of bow out of the round, and you're hoping to be the person that's closest to 21. But there's various different special effects on the cards that people can play that can change all of this. If you get knocked out of the game, then there's a way that the game sort of allows you to keep on playing, almost to try and sort of pull yourself back in. So that's a neat touch. There's a degree of complexity to it, but overall it's a pretty simple game. This one is not world-changing or anything like that, but it is a fun, frantic game in a really nice package from Ravensburger. So that's Black Jacky. So I'm going to finish each of these videos by looking for patterns, which designers were most popular with me, which publishers, which themes, which mechanisms. And so far we haven't seen recurring designers in my first 10 on the list. We have seen recurring publishers though. Amigo is doing particularly well here. Are there any others? No, I think it's Amigo has got 2. And in terms of theme, we've got, I think, 2 games about Japan, and we've got 3 games which are abstract, essentially themeless. And we've got nothing really which repeats mechanisms. Now, for the purposes of these lists, I'm ignoring the obvious mechanisms like set collection and hand management. These are too broad, so we're honing in a little bit on more detail. And nothing really recurring as yet, but I think as we go forward with the list, you'll start to see the same themes, the same mechanisms coming up time and again. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching. Let me know in the comments what you think of this first 10 in my top 100 all killer, all filler games, and I'll see you next time. All the best.